Good. It's so just so you guys know, I love experimenting, and I love energy, so I do move around when I talk and stuff too. But this is going to be fun because this top is one of my passions. I actually have a degree in it, so I don't get too often to dive deep into this. So I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited to have you guys here, and this is all about just fun. Go around, play, hopefully learn some stuff, but at the end of the day, it's just about getting together and connecting and having some fun. So with that said, I love to start something creative when I start my talks. So here we go. Oops, let's grab here. And
tired of that default CSS, 50 Shades of Grey.
What, like 50 Shades of Stress? I need a little love in my life. Feel stress. Told text to sex. With the button pop it out. The green and mint, whatever, no doubt. Looking for the clue. The text is coming through. A different view. Ooh, that's a different view. Coloristic. Yeah, here you go.
This is coloristic, coloristic. This is coloristic.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Tonight on the stage looking dim. All we need is to start through the flip a little bit.
I ain't about to let this project start
Without no pigment. Blue all the way to pink. What's your favorite color hue? A little off-white, because it's what we do. And if you say less is more, say more is more too. Coloristic. Nice. So that's my intro. Once again, I appreciate it. Thank you. Like I said, this is really fun. Coloristics is really about experimenting. And so we're going to have some fun here. Once again, my name is Coriano. Aris, if you want to say the Italian way, I'm Italian, but I don't force people to say Aris because in Italian the H is silent, so Harris is fine. But just so you know, if you do want to say it the Italian way, that's really cool. So today we're going to go just some quick introductions of what coloristics is. We're going to talk about the foundations in there, which deals with color theory. We're going to look at some cultural considerations. Then we're going to dive in some apps that have used coloristics and the results of that. I'm a huge component of Pomodoro. So what I'm going to do when that comes, I will ask if everybody wants to take a quick 5-minute break. If they don't, we'll just have to, but I'm a big component of that. And if you're not familiar with Pomodoro technique, it's basically incrementing rest in hours, within hours. So maybe, like for instance, I do 25 minutes of focus and 5 minutes off. So 10 minutes of away from my devices. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about how we can add coloristics into our work for UX and for front-end developers as well. So, but before I start, hands of UX people in here? Okay. All right, developers? Okay. Hybrids? Doing both? Okay, nice, awesome. So yeah, let's first start talking about coloristics. So coloristic is this mixture of art, psychology, and science. And so it helps us to kind of figure out how we see and understand colors, and also how it makes us feel. And as the work we're doing, we're building for users. So it's very important that we convey the messages that we want to and make the users feel the way that we want them, so that they can either move forward through the workflow or their tasks that they're doing, or more importantly, have come back to the product to use later. And so once again here, you use color theory as one of the core foundations. The color wheel is a part of that. It kind of breaks up into kind of two parts, which is color relationships and then color harmony. So the difference between relationships and color harmony is that relationship is really focusing on how the colors are created, versus harmony is like, how do they work well with each other? How do they balance out? Is there going to be contrast with that? And then there's the color model. So there's really three, whoops, I don't know why that came off, but there you go. So there's three models. The last one is kind of a newer one, but there's additive and a subtractive. And we'll talk a little bit about those two as well. And then we're going to talk about one of the huge parts, which is color psychology. how we're conveying these emotions to drive users to move forward in a task and then help us to kind of generate some ROI. Let's go here. So first we'll kind of go through the color wheel kind of here. Once again, relationships, we have the primary. Those can be red, green, and blue. There's also the other one of red, blue, and yellow, which is kind of more for art, and kind of paint. And then we have secondary, which is taking two of the primaries to make a secondary. And we have our tertiary, which is one of the primaries and secondary. So what's great about that is they still have this connection. They still have this relationship. And so what are some ways that we can utilize these relationships in kind of the work we do? So one thing is like brand identity, main backgrounds, because those are primary colors. We have red, green, and blue. So we're very sensitive to that. So if we have brand colors that use that color, our eyes are going to be attracted to that quicker. And then some states where you can do some main actions, where you have like a call to action button. And once again here, it's kind of bold, it's instantly recognizable. And then we'll also talk about the emotional impact of it. Secondary is kind of where you can start have like secondary buttons, some highlights, where you want the content to be seen, but you don't want it to dominate the primary color. And then last, the tertiary is really, I use it for gradients, something that's even subtle. I also use it for hover states as well as another option to just give just that slight visual change for the user. But it's not overwhelming, it's not gonna gear them away from the direction or the things that I'm looking for, but it's giving them clues that maybe there's something here if they wanna go and look at that. And then color harmony, this is where we're looking at relationships. So there is 4 relationships. So we have monochromatic, and this is where we're looking at variations of the same color. And what's really nice is like minimalist designs really use this a lot. You can use this for highlights, for kind of subtle. We also use those for disabled or various states, whether that is a link or a button. Sometimes we'll just kind of use that, whatever that primary color, and then just kind of change the opacity to give that subtle, but still having it connected. And then we have analogous colors here, which are adjacent to each other, and they really help with being colors being in harmony because they sit next to the color. So the color wheel here, versus here, you have these 3 here. So that's another thing, like they still have this relationship. And then they do really help to kind of promote calmness. We can also, like say, use those with primary buttons. Complementary are the ones that are opposite. And what's nice about that, because they have the biggest contrast between them. And so that's really useful because if you can, like if your brand color is green and you're like, okay, I want some contrast here, I can look at this red and say, okay, let me look at different shades of that to see how I can use that so we can still have that contrast, but I don't want the red to dominate that green. So those are things that we can use that for. And then triadic colors are kind of the 3 colors that are spaced evenly between. So for instance, here you got this purple, it'll be this blue-green, it'll be that yellow-green. And so that's another way to kind of add balance, but I tend to use it for kind of highlighting content or something in there where there might be content, and then I have maybe some call to action statement in there or something that I do want the reader to stand out as they're reading through, is kind of where I use that. Okay. And then now we're gonna get into some color model, but I forgot to mention, I'd like this to be interactive too, so you guys can actually get the QR code, and I'd love to see what your response is to see which color model do we work with out of the 3 that were that I mentioned before, which is the additive, subtractive, and the Pantone. And then if you can't see the results, I'll be able to show you that here. Once you kind of take out the logo here. So I'm using a third-party one here, so we start. Okay, perfect. All right. Nice, yeah. We use additive because we are digital screens. And so digital screens, kind of under the hood, we use light. So we have to create that light on the black screen for light to come out and show us those different colors. Subtractive is the opposite, where we already have the light and now we need to subtract it. So we need to absorb that light so that other colors can come out. And then the Pantone is really, that's an 18, no, so yeah, that's a base color model, which is based off of 18 base colors. And that's been highly used in graphic design for logos and stuff for kind of consistency. But for us, because our devices or the collaborations can't really handle that right now, so additive is still the preferred and the model that we tend to use for any of our digital devices. Thanks for doing that. Let's drop that. Okay. And once again, kind of here, kind of talking a little bit about that. Once again, the reason why it's important to us because we build for digital screens. And so that's why it's hugely important to kind of understand kind of how that model works. And one thing is that it does intensify color. So that's the other thing that we have to look at. So there's a study where users prefer dark tended for dark mode. One of the reasons is because it's straining on the eye when it's all that light, that intensity that they're looking at one time. So having the black to absorb some of that. So one thing I do is if there's a chance where we need something, a white background, I'm starting to use what I call like the smoke white. And that's been really helpful to take some of that intensity away as a user. Just looking at the screen. Okay. Nice. Perfect. So now we're gonna get to more interactive. Now we're gonna start talking about the psychology of color. So out of these four here, I'd love to see what you would pick and for your response of like, how does red make you feel? And urgency, nice. Okay. Perfect. So now we're going to talk about red. So a lot of people pick urgency. And so that's one thing that's really nice about the color red is it already conveys that. So having that on, using the color red will bring attention. Whether you want it to be positive or negative, it will bring attention. And so those are the associations: attention, passion, love, danger, warning. You know, it's for me, red used to really trigger me because in school, my teacher was using red to mark my papers. So I didn't like the color red just because of what it was associated with. And so people have those feelings. So those are things we have to think about. You know, the other thing too with red increasing our blood pressure, that makes urgency like really, oh, okay, we're feeling this now. We want to go do something so we can relieve that. And that red can kind of help guide a user to like the next process. Go, oh, okay, that must be important. Let me go ahead and click on that. And then here are some examples of where you can see that out there in the wild: call to action buttons, error messages, alerts. So anywhere where we want to make sure that the content is seen by the user. And what's great about red is our eyes are geared towards red and yellow. And so what's great about that is that if you have other colors, the user's still going to, their eyes are still going to be guided to that red or yellow. So that's another thing that's effective with it. Okay, so I've got a couple of them, so yeah, if you want to participate, you can. So yeah, this is the psychology where we're just trying to understand how these colors make us feel. Using a third-party app, so I have to refresh it to get the results here. Okay, nice. 75 calmness. Awesome. Okay, so now we talk about blue. So there, like I said, trust, dependability, calm, serenity, stability, security, professionalism. You know, we perceive blue as trustworthy. It is a color that's recommended a lot in interviews to wear blue. It is a color that's recommended a lot for companies where they're taking users' personal information to kind of sense that, hey, you can trust us. It's safe to give us. And like I said, I have some use examples of that with some organizations. And then here are some of the places. So one is like login, having that blue for the button, the submit button, because that's conveying trust and that's conveying security. And so a user putting in their information, then seeing a blue, it's gonna like, okay, I think I can go and click on this, versus like some other colors where it would retreat back. And so that's one thing that's effective, is using blue for any of the actions that you want the user to feel safe or to build trust with. And then same here with financial banks, because they're dealing with users' money and personal information. Okay, so yeah, you guys are all welcome. Go here, I'm gonna go here. I think I had that one. So I should start, I think I might have to refresh it to see some of these results. Okay, nice, happiness and energy, 25, nice. Awesome, I appreciate that. So let's look at yellow here. So yellow, happiness, optimism, warning, caution, hunger, all those kind of playfulness, all kind of play into that. So once again, you're using colors to communicate these emotions, and if these emotions can connect with your users, they're more likely to continue using your product, they're more likely to feel comfortable coming back, they're more likely to want to move forward through whatever process they're working with. Here are some examples, and then here, yellow is the brightest color that the human eye sees. So even with red and yellow, we tend to, research is showing that we tend to still gravitate to the yellow versus the red. So that's another where if you're using red and you had some content that you wanted to make sure that was still being visibly seen, you could possibly use yellow with that red text. Don't necessarily recommend it, but you can use that to kind of make sure the user sees that content as well with the red text. And then some use cases here. Children's games, I see that a lot in there for the playfulness. We also have the warning messages here that are nice and subtle, so the user knows that, hey, there's a possibility, but it's not as intense as a red one where urgency, like, okay, yes, something's not working, we have to halt and fix that before we can move forward. And then the other thing is highlighting content. So I've seen that a lot on websites where they're using the yellow to highlight some of the words or content on the page. Okay, so I got probably like 3 more if y'all want to continue doing this. I didn't realize I had that many, but this is all fun stuff. But let me do that here. So we have that. Go here. All right. Then I'll refresh again. Should start some. Okay, perfect, bro. Awesome. I'll go back one time and see if there's any more results. Okay, perfect, awesome. Thank you. Okay, perfect. So now we kind of go into green. We start looking at these color associations: growth, harmony, safety, permission, nature, stability, wealth. So these are really great colors for companies that are focusing on health and focusing on giving users indications that things are going correct. I took the right next step. So that builds confidence. That's one way green helps users to build confidence. And then once again, financial institutions might use green to kind of symbolize growth and money.
Lawyers.
Huh? Lawyers? All right, so let's see here. So this one is purple. Oh, let's see here. And we'll see. Perfect. Refresh that. Okay, perfect. Creativity, luxury, nice. So you have here, luxury, elegance, creativity, imagination. There's even, there's people who associate purple with intelligence as well in there too. And so what's nice about purple is it's got these really a great story behind, because purple used to be called tyrant purple. And back in I think it's a 1800, if you saw someone walking around with purple grapes, they were considered wealthy. And so that's starting that kind of starting us to kind of look at that as that royalty, that luxury kind of color and stuff too. And then some of the places where you might see that, you could see that in like car websites, you can see that in creative ads, cosmetics, even spiritual and wellness apps. You'll see that because that can represent spirituality and also dignity and mystery and things like that. So I've seen purple used in some of the games, like hidden object games and stuff too as well. Okay, and then this is orange. Looks like let's go with enthusiasm, for me. And I'll let it go for a second, and then we'll go here. Okay, perfect. Nice. Okay, so kind of energy, enthusiasm, affordability, value, confidence, big lots. That's a big reason Big Lots uses orange, because of the affordability that is associated with it. And then kind of here of what it can combine is energy, because it combines red, so it brings kind of that urgency, but it also kind of balances with that yellow to kind of make it fun and playful. And so that's another reason like orange is a really pleasant color. Like I said, you do see those in CTAs, certain organizations are using that. I've seen them with putting that out there for offers and deals, because of like, hey, you get 25% off if you get that, to kind of go with that affordability. Budgets. Perfect. So now we're going to move into that. So we kind of went through some color psychology kind of here in the United States, but we also build for international clients and international people. So we have to think about the ramifications of the colors associations regarding those applications. And so here's an example of some of this here. So kind of did this comparison. So we got the red, passion, and also danger. But when we look at international, China, luck, India, purity. But South Africa and Middle Eastern, it's negative. So the thing that we have, since we do have a huge amount of international that live here too, some of our products can be conveyed that way. So we have to think about that too, and we have done some researches where we were able to just kind of figure out if someone was a native or a non-native. And so you can start looking at that, because this could play a factor in someone not moving forward because of their background or where their culture or where they're from. And then we have here for blue, Middle East safety, reliability, but blue is considered mourning in Korea. And then there's there was multiple, so I just kind of wrote that associated that with coldness, sadness, and depression. Then we have green, like I say, growth, eco-friendly, Middle Eastern, fertility, Brazil, hope, but China, infidelity, France, criminality. So, which blew my mind with the color green. I would never associate that with that. But it's really interesting to see, like I said, depending on where you're at, how people perceive and associate colors. So we're looking here at yellow. So yellow here, optimism, happiness, royalty in Thailand, in Egypt is happiness, but in Germany it's envy, France, and China associates yellow with pornography. And the backstory of that, because it blew my mind, I was like, I want to research and figure out how did they get this association. But back in the 1800s, a lot of the brothels were using yellow to draw their attention to the clients, so they started associating with that. And then in the 70s, because pornography was banned at that time, they were smuggling the US VH tapes, if I remember correctly from the study, but they were labeling it with yellow to kind of indicate that too. So that played a little factor, I think, in that association. But that was something that kind of blew my mind. I never I didn't know that China associates yellow with pornography. So those are things that we have to be sensitive to. For instance, here in India with white, it's a positive and a negative in a sense. It is peace, but it can also symbolize sadness or funerals and things like that, or loss. So there we go. And so yeah, now we're going to get into some of the real use cases of that. Spotify, good example. So they did a study in 2015. So all my studies are within around 10 years or so, but in 2015 they had this dull gray, and they were getting, it was low energy, users were disengaging, they weren't staying, the sessions were really short, or they were what we call doing drop-offs, where they come in, hang out, and then leave right away. So they started doing some research. They found out that, hey, let's look at changing our colors. So we're a young company, we have energy, we have youth, we want to kind of start communicating that. So one thing they wanted to do was get green and kind of intensify it so that it draws attention. And with that, they were able to kind of start sparking more energy, and that led to a 40% increase in their session time. And with that generated over 42 million annually just by them using the coloristics and kind of going, okay, what color can we use that symbolizes our mission statement or our brand, and let's use that and figure out how do we want that color being displayed. Do we want to mute it? Do we want some intensity to it to draw attention? And so that's one of the examples here. Another one here is Airbnb. Airbnb used to be this muted gray scheme, and so even though they did a good job of using blue to symbolize trust, but because it was muted, users either skipped it or didn't have an urgency to click on it. And so with the fact that we work in this additive color model space, we're drawn to intensity from the screen, where we retreat from kind of muted or less intensity colors. And so with that, they decided to do this rebranding and look at another color, and they came across this warm pink. They balanced it with the teal, and that helped to increase bookings by 35% for them in 2017, and that was a 40% revenue increase within annually over $68 million. Okay. Dropbox, another one. They were using blue too because they wanted to symbolize trust and security, but they were focusing on this light gray that was blending in with their other color scheme. So a lot of users were skipping this. And the other thing, a lot of users just didn't get the urgency to feel like they need to sign up or move forward to the next step. But by them wanting to keep blue, they want to stay within the trust, calmness, security. They decided to increase the intensity of blue, and just doing that alone helped to kind of build more action for the users to click and move forward. And that increased 30% here. This was 2017, we're rebranding. They had a 25% growth in upsell revenue, which generated over 36 million annually. Okay, so this is where we had the break. You guys want a break? Are we good? Can we move forward?
We're good. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I'm kind of sad I had sound for there too. So yeah, let's move forward. So now we go to Netflix. So we all know Netflix. And 2016, they were using this muted gray-red color here. And that muted gray-red color was, once again, it wasn't catching the user's attention, it wasn't building urgency, and they were having this user drop-offs. So they decided here to kind of change, where they went with this intensity red and the black background, which kind of fueled passion as well as like urgency to click on it. And that ended up generating about a 50% increase in watch time for them, which then boosted about 6% in retention revenue, which almost $200 million annually. And then Amazon, which goes Amazon here, they had that dull orange gray. Here, once again, it was blending in. Users didn't feel the motivation to click on it. Like I said, it had a high bounce rate, drop-offs, and so they decided to kind of do some research, intensify the orange, kind of balance that with the white. Also having using the black on the yellow also caught users' attention as well. And because of that, they were able to.
Oh, I was just wondering, so you're showing a lot of these, the befores were from, say, 2013 to 2016. What was the, do you know about what the fashion style was and why so many of these companies were using gray on gray? What they were trying to do with it back then?
Yeah, I'm not sure the fashion style, but it was interesting to see that some reason in the 2010s, it seems like that pale muted color was in for some reason. So I'm not 100% sure why that was kind of the trend, but that is something that I kind of noticed, like, ooh, a lot of these colors were kind of, like I said, they didn't have a lot of intensity, they were more muted, and then them changing to, and then also looks like a lot of that trend started going to more of that intensity color, because intensity is what draws our eyes, especially through the devices here because of the light that emits out of it. So by them just increasing that, still keeping their same, the same emotional association with that too. But I'm not 100% sure what at that time was necessarily they were using for that, but I did notice that several of my studies were focusing on colors that were kind of muted or light.
Okay, because it's interesting that the color of the year this year is coffee, and the idea is that it's supposed to evoke calm, so calm people down. And if a lot of websites have these really bright colors, is the calm and responding in part to that too? Bright colors are part of our culture now.
It's as long as it draws action, it will be. As long as the research is still showing that people are clicking on this.
Yeah, well, is it overdoing it? So, the calm for 2025, might be.
Well, it depends on. I think it really depends on what you're trying to convey. Now, there's a part where it can be a mixture of that. Maybe you have something where you have calmness and something where you're like, hey, we want to make sure users click on this. But the calmness, it's not building urgency. It is relieving it and making the user feel probably comfortable and safe, but it's not necessarily drawing their eyes to what we want for them to move forward. Because if a user, the more that a user sees something, the more likely they're going to click on it. So if you bring them back to this button as they're on this page for a minute or two, and they might see this button 3 or 4 times in that minute, they're more likely to click on that. But that is, to me, comes up to what's the use case, what are we trying to do? And then I know for companies, they're trying to build revenue, they're trying to build clients, so they want to use color schemes and products that will help users to move forward so they can build that revenue. There are some sites that are looking for calmness, and that's where you might want to use it in, let's say Spotify too as well, because if your goal is session, keeping people on the page, you want to make sure you have some calmness so that it gives a chance for the eyes to rest. So, because if we look at something that's intensive for a long time, we start getting a dry eye, we start getting irritations, things like that, and that's not something we want. So that's where maybe there's that, having that nice balance of going, okay, where else do I need the user to go? Okay, great, they're here. We want them to stay here for a little while. That's where I feel that you can bring in kind of more of that lighter, calm color in that situation. But with this here, let's correct, let's go back here. So with this here, because they were getting a lot of bounce rates with that, and this, like I said, with the urgency, we're really motivating them. The calmness allows the user to just kind of decide if they want to, which is not bad, but we're in a business of hopefully getting them to move through the process and use our services. So we want to use colors that will help drive that as well. I'm not saying that we need to try to, sway them, but we do want them to move forward in the process. We want them to come to our site and use our product at the end of the day. And then with this here, 55% increase. One of the reasons they're still using that color, and almost $250 million of annual with just looking at their color scheme and changing some of that so that they can communicate different emotions and also be able to cause action for the user here. So another one here is PayPal. PayPal is using this, once again, light blue. Here they decided to go with a vibrant blue, a deeper blue, a yellow to kind of work with that trust and then also with that optimism because they were still new at that time. And so that helped to increase their transactions almost 45%, and then a revenue of almost 130 annually with just, once again, looking at Coloristic, looking at color psychology, looking at the color model, all these different things, and then deciding, going, okay, we're going to increase the color because we want that urgency, we still want the trust, but let's also put optimism, something fun in here, so that the users know, like, okay, great, this is safe for me to use, but this is going to be fun because it's going to help me take care. I don't have to use my credit card to go ahead and make these transactions. And so here's a quick wrap up of all of those. Like I said, Spotify gray. Like I said, a lot of these pale colors in the mid and late 2010s, and then really changing to these vibrant colors here, and then just the user engagement by making these changes, and then the revenue here of all those different organizations. And so now, like, how can we add this? How can we incorporate coloristics in the work that we're doing? One is really understanding your brand. Hugely important. If you understand your brand, you can start looking at how you can use these colors to communicate that. And that's really huge. Then you can start using that to looking at the color psychology, you can start looking at the color wheels, start looking at that. And like I said, from the real life situations, you've seen the impact with some organizations by doing that and the results they're getting from that. Another one here is, if you're familiar with the 60-30-10 rule, Airbnb uses that a lot. That's a really good for kind of building, you'll see it down here, kind of with that connection here where you're like, okay, we want some harmony, but then we want a little subtle so we know that there's something different here. And then color, another thing that we do is a color psychology research. I really enjoy this. This is where we are taking our brand colors or our colors in our design system and listening to our users. How does this make you feel? Kind of what we did with the poll. How does this make you feel? Does that still match our brand, our mission? And so it's really helpful to see that going, oh, okay, that color actually is not communicating what we would like it to communicate. And then here's some things for developers, front-end developers. You know, having a flexible color system, like I said, CSS variables are great for consistency. It's just nice to be able to update and change these colors when you need to. Another one is like accessibility here, having that nice contrast between, also thinking about users with different color deficiencies as well to make sure that they can see those things too. But that color contrast is really huge with users being able to easily separate content. And then different devices. So this one's, to me, is really huge because as we build out things for different devices, and we know they don't all play nice with each other. And so we have to test and say, okay, is the iPhone, the color we're using for iPhone, does that still convey the message as our desktop version or something if we're using the same color? So we want to look at that, and that might mean where on mobile we're going to adjust some of the color scheme, or we're going to adjust the brightness or something to it just so we can keep that same message. And then last one is browsers. Once again, all the browsers don't work well with each other, so it's also making sure that you're doing the browsers check to make sure that the colors are still accurate for the different devices. That's it. So the takeaways here is just like leveraging psychology because emotional, that motivates people to do action. I feel this is a really good way where designers and developers can also come in line with each other, and another way for them to build their relationship and transparency. The example is showing kind of the results of making these changes or doing these color psychology researches. And in here, just play and test and listen to your users to see what those different emotions come up, and then adjust to where you need to, so you make sure you can